All right, thank you everyone for their patience. I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting here, the town of St. Andrews. We are at the council chambers. This will also be streamed through Zoom and Facebook. If anyone has any questions related to this evening's agenda, please reach out to pnopper@townofstandrews.ca, and on Facebook, I know Mr. Nopper will be sure to put it in the comments. I see that all members of council are in attendance with exception of Councillor Blanchard. So thank you, council, for being here. And I do want to recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Peskotomuhkati people. Approval of the agenda. I'll be looking for a mover to start. I've got Councillor Heenan and seconded by Councillor Harland. It does have closed session listed as an item, but I just wanted to let council know that there is one item for Local Governance Act Section 68(1)(f), which is information concerning legal opinions or advice provided to the local government by its solicitor, a privileged communication between solicitor and the client in a matter of local government business. So we will be exercising that this evening. Any other changes or anything to add? Okay, let's call the question. All in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Agenda is carried. Disclosure of conflict of interest any this evening? Seeing none, that will bring us into our presentations. The first one is a Community Service Award, so I will switch to the podium for this one. One moment. Appreciation Awards just a couple of weeks ago, but there was a special appreciation award that we did want to present at a council meeting because it is very significant, and we'll talk about it a little bit more elaborately, and I know I'll call Councillor Gumashall up here in a moment to speak to it, but we have a resident of our community, Matthew Dickson, who biked across the entire country. So he started out west and went headed east around the same time that our own Councillor Gumashall started east and headed west. They kind of had two different strategies. One was kind of, I'm going to take it off the fly, and the other one had it all nice mapped out. The end result is you're both here safely. But I do want to recognize that in particular, what Matthew was doing was he was drawing awareness of schizophrenia. And he did a lot of different radio, a lot of different conversations with communities. A lot of people probably for the first time might have even heard where St. Andrews, New Brunswick was across your travels. And I know that yourself, it's been a long journey with mental health to be able to feel well and to be able to do that and be comfortable about talking and really facing some stigmas around it. And I think that what you did was extremely remarkable and extremely special. So I want it in front of all of council to recognize it. Councillor Gubish, I do want to come up because I know you met him. So I'll let you on his journey. So I'll give you just a moment here.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for all the advance notice on speaking. Certainly, biking across Canada was a bucket list thing for me, and to do it once was I'm pretty proud of the accomplishment. But our friend Matthew here has done it twice. And I remember hearing way back in the day that he had biked across Canada. I can't say for sure if it planted a seed with me or not. That was during university, so I don't exactly remember it quite back that far. But certainly, growing up in the Terry Fox era and all that sort of stuff, going across Canada and all the things that surround that, meeting people, going to all the different provinces. And spreading the word about St. Andrews was a great summer for me, and meeting Matthew halfway in Wawa in the middle of nowhere where we had a picnic and hung out was really nice. Certainly I was embracing my inner maritimer as I was going waving at people, and Matthew kind of said, what are you doing? Well, you got to wave, and he didn't wave. It was he's not quite as outgoing maybe as I was, and so each day I think we should recognize that it was challenging for Matthew, maybe where it wasn't for me to just go out and be a bit silly. For him it was a little bit more difficult to put himself out there each day. So for that reason, I think he certainly deserves a lot more accolades than me, who was just kind of doing it on a lark. He had a mission, he had a message, and he did the town very proud. cruising all across the country. So for that reason, I think Matthew should get his community service award.
Come on up, Matthew.
A bit of blathering. Oh, sorry.
And Matthew, would you like to say a couple words?
I can.
I gave you about the same amount of notice as I did Councillor Michelle. The microphone's yours.
Can I turn this? Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I, like Kurt said, I biked across Canada when I was 20, and I wanted to do more fun stuff like that with my life. But at 22, I got schizophrenia, and back in 1994, we weren't supposed to talk about mental illness at all. And anyway, things have changed, and my health has changed. I improved every single week for 27 years. I noticed an improvement every single week. And it was this spring in March when I said the word schizophrenia out loud in public here in St. Andrews at Honey Beans, the coffee shop here. And I looked around, oh my gosh, I said that out loud because I would whisper it even in St. Andrews here in like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I would whisper the word schizophrenia if there are people around, even if I just was so scared to say it. And like Kurt was saying, he was more outgoing. When I met Kurt in Wawa, just past Wawa, I remember thinking, I think you're having a lot more fun than I am on this trip, Kurt. You seem so happy to do it. And I was really, it was really nice to see too, because this spring in March, you had said that well, I already knew you were going to bike across Canada. You had said it the summer before. And that was the seed that said, Matthew, come on, Kurt's doing it. Why don't you do it again? You've got the health now. I was 99% sure I had the health to do this. And I had a lot of the unknowns already worked out because I'd done it before. And I was in a unique place to have had done the trip. And with schizophrenia, I could do it again to show that people with schizophrenia can recover. And it's not to say that you have to bike across Canada to be happy and to be recovered, but you can have a life outside of just dismality, if that's a word. I don't know. My father's an English teacher. Is that a word, Dad? I wanted to show that give people hope that recovery is possible, and plus I really like doing the trip. I had a lot of fun doing it, and the other thing I want to say is that I didn't have the funds to do this trip. I had a little bit of money to start, and I thought maybe if I got out there and people saw me actually biking and not saying for the umpteenth time I want to bike across Canada, and if I was out there going from day to day biking with the funds I had, that people might donate to keep me going. That's all I really could do. And thankfully, a lot of people in town here, the town of St. Andrews is a big support, and people in Charlotte County and other people I know through the years in Canada and some other places donated to help get me across. And I tear up when I think about that. I was just so thankful that, because without it, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I'd have had to start hitchhiking from Alberta, probably back home. And I can't say enough how thankful I am for everybody who let me do this trip. And plus all the words of encouragement and praise on YouTube and Facebook. I was just over the moon about that. I had the time of my life. So this is just wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. And later on in the agenda, under communications, we're actually going to be speaking about mental health town hall. So please stand around. People generally, when we get into the meeting, take off, but we're going to get you to stay for a few minutes because the letter is from you. The next presentation is John Matheson, who is the chair of the Shiretown Community Service. It is a request for support on affordable housing at Queen Street and Princess Royal Street. So there is a diagram I note in front of you, Council. So the floor is yours. I guess, Mr. Matheson, what are we going there? Over to you.
Probably know me long enough, you can call me John. Matthew's a pretty hard act to follow. So congratulations, Matthew. And I don't think I've biked around the block for a few years, so I better get back in shape if I'm going to keep up with Matthew. Shiretown Community Services, as many of you know, is a nonprofit charitable organization founded in the early 2000s. It didn't do very much for a few years, but then we found a project that we have found very rewarding, that is employing adults with barriers to employment, to find employment. And so we've been training 5-6 adults to prepare meals and serve those at the community lunches on Friday. But Shiretown Community Services mandate is very broad, and includes housing for those who perhaps can't afford to live in St. Andrews right now. We know you said that maybe some people had not heard of St. Andrews. I find that wherever I go, there are people who have heard of St. Andrews. Many people have worked at the Algonquin. There are many people who have vacationed here. And of course, during COVID, a lot of people moved here. Housing prices have risen, and it's not a place where some people who are on minimum wage or just above minimum wage can afford to live. So the Legion lot has been vacant for a few years since the building was deemed beyond repair, and has been used as a parking lot for the last few summers. Shiretown has worked out a plan with the Royal Canadian Legion Branch number 8 to purchase the land and to develop it for affordable housing. There'll be 10 to 12 units. We want to, of course, fit within the bylaws of the town. And we're just in the early planning stages now. The rendering that has been passed around is very preliminary, and we would, of course, hope that the building would fit into the to the neighborhood well. And not quite sure. I like the color scheme at the bottom of the page there. It looks rather 1970s. We probably update that and try to match the building's exterior and its design with the surrounding buildings. So if there were to be 12 units and 500 square feet each, then the cost would be approximately $2,310,000, and take into account other fees and costs involved in preparing the land and getting permits and that sort of thing. I rounded up the cost to $2,500,000. And given the amount has been given to other projects in the past, and I know that the town is going to apply for some money to encourage affordable housing in town, making request of the town of $225,000, which is 10% of the projected total cost. Any questions?
Yes, I'll open it up to council to ask questions. So, sorry, the units are 10 to 12 units. Is that?
That's right, according to what we can fit on the lot within the bylaws.
And those are 1-bedroom units, or?
Well, that some would probably be 1 bedroom and some 2-bedroom. 2 of them would be given priority to veterans in honor of the heritage of the property, and also the Royal Canadian Legion has been given the privilege of naming the building. So that would, we want to keep the Legion and Veterans Affairs involved in the project. And
is there any idea of what the rent would be per unit? And
well, the rent would be in keeping with, there would be half of the units would be subsidized, so that would be in keeping with the NB housing formula, 30% of income, and some would be at market value, which I think both the federal government and the provincial government require. So I would like to think they would be in the below $1,000 per month. Okay. But that's again, you have to see what the market bears, and once we know what the costs are and how much we're being subsidized by the various agencies. Of course, the the less the building in the end costs us, the lower the mortgage. You have to pay the mortgage.
So, well, first and foremost, thank you for Shiretown Community Service for all they're doing in the community. A lot of us are very familiar of the lunch program that's been very, very successful and enjoyed by a number of different people in the community. And not even just that aspect, just some of the young individuals that are getting these skills. I do know some have gone on to even enter into culinary at NBCC as a result of the foundation that you're providing for them. So thank you for that. And of course, the fact that you're raising your hand to try to provide affordable housing in St. Andrews, it's certainly greatly appreciated. I think where the challenge with the town is currently is we have applied for the Housing Accelerator Fund. And I think once we get a response on that, that's going to be a really a good indicator of how impactful as a municipality we can be. We had originally been one of the very few municipalities across Canada that submitted an application to that particular fund. And unfortunately, because I know that this is a challenge across Canada, not a lot of communities got it in, so they extended that date. So we haven't heard any success, but ultimately, if we get those funds, that would be even a quarter of what we asked for. That would be a game changer for projects like this. Council's going through budget process right now. My understanding is that amount of money would be outside of the current budget, but we're in that process of setting right now. I will say, kind of looking at other projects that have been funded, we've had kind of, before any agreement was made, we knew specifically exact how many units it would be and for what price. And we also, in the case of our significant investment, this would be the second largest investment, I believe, in the history of St. Andrews if council was to decide that, we also were able to lock the rents in for 15 years, which we're going through the process again. So some of that stuff for taxpayers' money, we need to make sure that we are, in fact, hitting the dartboard when we throw the dart, per se. So that's all stuff that I know it's preliminary for you, but I think for this council, it's all stuff for deliberation that they're going to need to know. We've had other developers come here and not be able to tell us what they're going to charge, how many units. So at the end of the day, because of that, we weren't able to get any deal done. And, part of the thing that is encouraged by the municipality is we actually develop some type of, I guess you could say almost like a development, not a development scheme bylaw, but some type of development bursary program, which would really have a clear indication of you're doing this is what you get in return, versus a piecework by, hey, we like this one, we don't like this one, to have a clear policy. But that's kind of right now, like council, unless you see it differently, I think we really need to know specifically what this project, I know it's a little chicken and egg, because if you get more money, right, it can indicate what you want to do. So there's probably a bigger conversation that would need to happen. And again, I right at this point, I don't know where we would, without getting that Housing Accelerator Fund, where this money would come. Council, do you have any specific questions or comments? Councillor Harlan?
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Thanks, John, for the presentation. It was great. It's really great to see the work that Shiretown Community Services is doing. It's growing as an organization, which is really wonderful. The one question I had is, what I heard you say was that half of the units would be subsidized through Department of Social Development.
Qualify for subsidies through NB Housing.
Would be
same as Quinn House and Quaddy Breezes and
right.
The McCoy House.
So have you had some conversations?
Yes, we had a representative from NB Housing come and speak to our
okay,
group.
You have, great.
Yeah.
And they said that this project would meet the criteria.
Oh, yes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Any other member of council? Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Matheson. Can you just explain more about who you were targeting to house in this house?
Well,
thank you.
Of course, there's various opinions about that, but we're looking at people who would like to work in town but can't afford to live in town. People who are working seasonally, perhaps single mothers. I've been told that the group that finds it hardest to find affordable housing are women over 50 who don't yet qualify for CPP or old age pension, and are probably working at minimum wage jobs. They're on their own, and So we like to target those who would like to live here but can't afford to live here. Maybe they're even from here. I know some people have moved back to St. Andrews after being away for years and find it very difficult to live here now because of the rental costs.
So this being a Shiretown project, would you expect that you would put some of your own clients in the housing?
Oh, they could apply, I would imagine, like anyone else. NB Housing, for the subsidizable units, as I understand it, they have a waiting list. And if they're subsidizing those units, then those individuals have to go on the waiting list like anyone else.
Any other member of council? All right. So I think for next steps, what would make sense is obviously the public awareness is key, but I think it's important for maybe town and staff and even the council planning to sit down and talk about specifics of what that looks like. I don't want to delay an answer, but that housing accelerator fund is such a big component of where the funds would come from, because essentially that is money that the municipality received that would not be paid. Ultimately, we're all Canadian taxpayers, but it would be federal dollars, and it could be 100% federally funded, is my understanding, with no matching funds from the municipal government. So in a perfect world, that would be a wonderful opportunity to say that. And I know one of the things that we've talked about in the past is obviously with the ties to the Legion is you'd also be looking for potentially veterans or widows or spouses of veterans to potentially house there as well, which would be definitely a wonderful add. And then the other thing is just for the public's awareness is this would require rezoning, I'm assuming, Mr. Knopper, Mr. Spear. So there would be a process that this would have to go through, as I believe it is zoned currently institutional. The one thing that does jump out, and I'm sure that it is probably there, but in the diagram, I don't see any parking. I'm assuming that for a 12-unit building, there would be adequate parking to...
The town manager and I have talked about that, and that will be a challenge. I'm not sure whether we would go through the process of asking for a variance or there are other ways to address that. Mr. Spear has told me. So I think that would be part of the discussions we would have when we decide how many units we're going to build.
Well, that sounds good, but it sounds like, though, that between the Legion and yourself, sounds like you have a formal agreement in place, so it's time for us to really get down and start talking what it could potentially look like and what the municipality could or could not contribute. So I appreciate the presentation, as it's the first step is making the public aware of this before we go down any road and have any conversation. So thank you for being here and presenting tonight.
Well, thank you for making time for me. And once we perhaps talk to the town manager and Mr. Doppler, we can get down to work and answer some of the questions that have to be answered.
That would be great. Thank you again. The last presentation for this evening is the Director of Planning for for SNBSC, so Alex Henderson. He is going to be here regarding the proposal for bylaw 23-01, which is a subdivision bylaw for the town of St. Andrews. He must be joining us via Zoom, is he?
I am, your worship. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm just making sure he wasn't at the table. I did that to Xander once.
No, I had some trouble logging on here, so all right, so I'm going to get the presentation up. Can everybody see that? All right, so this is a subdivision bylaw for the town of St. Andrews. So this is a bylaw that basically replaces both your current subdivision bylaw number 69, and it would supplant the role of the provincial subdivision regulation for the rural areas of St. Andrews, Shamcook and Bayside. Now, both these regulations that regulate subdividing in St. Andrews are fairly old, 1980 and 1984. They haven't been updated since. So there's a need to modernize the subdivision rules for St. Andrews. In 2020, there was a new municipal plan adopted by council for the town site of St. Andrews, which had a number of goals, objectives, policies that related to how new subdivisions would work. So it was envisioned when the municipal plan was adopted that this subdivision bylaw would be brought up to sort of a modern standard at some future point after the municipal plan put the policies in place. So this subdivision bylaw really comes from that, but also touches on some of the objectives that are in the rural areas, and I'll get to that in a minute. So there's a couple things here. It's not just that the documents we're using for subdividing land are older. We also had the local government reform, which changed the boundaries of the town. So now you have rural and urban, so to speak. And there's some different rules that would apply for each. So we do need to have a regulation that kind of outlines when and where those rules are and whose responsibility is what. So this document addresses that and provides clarity for development. So as I said, this subdivision bylaw we have for the town currently is old, and it cites an old standard for streets. We actually can't use this one just because it doesn't meet modern specs for engineering. So it's often when subdivision is done, we have to use go above and beyond and use the current standard, which is the 2017 DTI standard. But so when this bylaw is drafted, some of the regulations related to street sizes, blocks, they're very much focused on car-oriented development, not very much consideration for pedestrians or cyclists. So this is one of the things we have to look at with the new development of streets and new subdivisions. The provincial subdivision regulation also has a limitation in the sense that it doesn't allow for any lands for public purpose. So lands for public purpose is set aside portions of land up to 10%. In the case of St. Andrews, it's 8%. And these are lands for parks, for a future community amenity that the developer doesn't build these amenities, but they have to set aside land to dedicate to the local government so that these can be supplied to the development by the local government in the future. So dedicating land for public purpose is an important part of subdividing land. And currently we can't do it in the rural areas. So we talked about the DTI standards and how some communities have adopted them just because they provide an easy reference for rules and regulations on road widths, block length, and so on. And there's a number of engineering specs that kind of provide some standard ways to construct roads. But the planning sort of components, some of the discretionary decisions around the length of block and so on, in some ways they don't really meet the community's objectives around active transportation, age-friendly communities, bringing in considerations for cycling. So we had to look elsewhere for some standards that would meet the objectives of the municipal plan. Also, with the current structure for rural areas where you can't get lands for public purpose, things like providing access to the intertidal zone, which is in both rural plans, it's near impossible to actually make sure that this policy happens. It was put in the plans when those plans were drafted back in 2009 and 2010, but neither plan could really achieve that without the subdivision rules changing, allowing for public access in new subdivisions. So, as I said, in addition, the town's municipal plan has a number of things that pertain to how it envisioned its subdivision bylaw changing. And these are a few of the things: trails, connectivity for recreation, innovative green infrastructure solutions for drainage. New roads must have walking and cycling infrastructure or multi-use paths, traffic calming on all residential streets, and tree-lined streets. Now, this is also echoed by your transportation master plan, which is not a bylaw, but it was a study done by the engineers of CBCL, and that was a community-wide process. So they have a number of recommendations in there for your new streets. So with adopting a new subdivision bylaw, it's an opportunity to work towards a sustainable, healthy, and safe community that your municipal plan calls for, as well as the transportation master plan. In addition, you're meeting some of the objectives of the Shamcook and Bayside rural plans by encouraging lands for public purpose, which can be used for things like community amenities in rural areas, as well as things like accesses for boats or other pathways down to the beach, which can be cut off by development if there's no consideration for lands for public purpose. as well, talking about the role of active transportation in building healthy community and an age-friendly community. So this subdivision bylaw and the standards which we looked at for new streets certainly includes consideration for that, and you'll see that in a minute. As well, there's a big role for climate resilient infrastructure, so green infrastructure, street trees, bioswales, things which are capable of absorbing large quantities of water that don't rely on just building expensive concrete storm mains. So we also are dealing with a new regulatory environment for planning in the whole province, actually. Just this month, we had the Statements of Public Interest regulation adopted by Cabinet. So this applies to all new planning bylaws for the province. And in it, there are some broad statements that are essentially regulatory and required for all new planning bylaws. So things that the Statements of Public Interest regulation calls for with your subdivision bylaw, municipal plan, future zoning bylaw, is to promote a range of transportation options, including public and active transportation, consideration for energy conservation and the layout of communities, climate change, climate resiliency, promoting green infrastructure, which means things like bioswales, as we talked about, and other sort of natural solutions, and to make sure that development is occurring in areas where public infrastructure exists and promote those areas, or to promote them in locations where there's no services, but there's existing actively maintained roads. So this is something we're looking at, and I would recommend that the next steps be followed, that this goes to the PAC for views, as well as we do the public hearing. Because this is a brand new regulation and that this bylaw is going to have to comply with it, I'm also going to suggest we send it to the minister's office, so Paul Jordan, to check that this proposed bylaw would meet this regulation. As I said, this is new as of this month, so we're learning it. I just did a training session last week with the other planners in New Brunswick, but we want to make sure it complies. We had some idea of what it contained and built the subdivision bylaw around that. But with some training, we're still learning how to use this new, apply this new provincial regulation. Okay, so the way that this bylaw works is it doesn't just adopt one standard for all streets, like a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, it provides different types of standards for different types of access and different types of purpose. So from arterial down to a private right-of-way. So you have various traffic volumes involved, various types of infrastructure involved, and it's not one size fits all. As well, you have certain streets that aren't under the jurisdiction of the town currently. So you wouldn't have control over streets and the new construction in Shamcook or Bayside at this present. Those are still under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. So essentially the DTI rules around street width, street lengths, and so on, those would still apply in Shamcook and Bayside. The one difference the subdivision bylaw would bring to Shamcook and Bayside is, again, that requirement for lands for public purpose. So that would be new, and that would involve council. So if you were going to be accepting land for public purpose in Shamcook or Bayside, then that would be council's discretion. Okay, so for the urban streets and for the streets that are under your jurisdiction, this lays out some guidelines as to how those would be constructed. Now, there's little graphics here involved, and they're just for illustration purposes only. But this basically illustrates a kind of idea of what a collector might look like in this instance. So standard A2. Basically, the idea is each street's going to have to be custom engineered by the developer, and that the municipal engineer correspondingly will have to approve those plans and profiles and specifications to make sure it meets this bylaw, as well as good engineering practice. So essentially, each street is going to be essentially custom designed per the location. But there's going to be some basic requirements that would have to be met for fire department access requirements, basic ideas around street safety, not overbuilding streets in areas where you don't want traffic to be too fast, narrowing up streets to slow down traffic for your residential and other types of lower density environments, or environments that are going to be primarily for walking. So you might have alleyway developments that potentially could be used for a more pedestrian oriented environment. So again, these are much narrower than what you would have for your standard DTI 20-meter width or 24-meter in the case of rural. But with these streets, what you can do if you narrow up the traveling surface, you can actually provide a safer environment because you're not encouraging excessive speeding on residential streets, where people have to navigate around a kind of a closer environment where they're having to look out for people and pedestrians, and it's not just a sort of a large sort of highway environment on a residential street. So not all engineering standards for overly large streets are actually good or encouraged for environments where you don't need that level of infrastructure. So this tries to narrow up the street as best you can, as well as accommodating underground infrastructure in the case of Class A, or above ground infrastructure in case of Class B here. Or if you're doing a laneway where it's mostly pedestrian oriented, making sure you meet minimum requirements for emergency vehicle access. And in case of Class A standard C1 here, this is a private access. And this would be used in limited cases where a public road wouldn't make sense. So let's say you're developing a peninsula where it's just going to serve the development only. This may be an appropriate solution, but you still want to have things like active transportation considered, and not to be overly long as well. So making sure that the standards make sense for the type of access it is. As well here, just standard right-of-way, if it's going to be very short, less than 90 meters for emergency vehicle access, it may be an appropriate solution, but doesn't have many standards whatsoever. It's just a driveway with a couple lots that might be created off of it. So when you get to the process here, this Appendix A kind of lays out how a new subdivision with new infrastructure would be created. Starts with your tentative and goes all the way down to council approving it after municipal engineer approval and inspections and quality control from the developer. So there's a whole process here that's kind of, I can go through it, but it'd be quite lengthy. But anyway, what we're trying to do is make the process visual so people can, with a little bit of time, can kind of get understanding and familiarity with the process, and actually help stimulate a little bit of imagination as well by using some visuals. Yeah, so I'll just stop sharing this and turn back to you. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henderson. Appreciate the presentation. So council, I know you've had some time to look at this. I myself have a lot of questions. And I do have to remind myself that it is for new development, not current development, just when you see things, but yet there are some things that make me think of the current infrastructure when we are setting this for a new standard. I guess my first comment is obviously, it makes sense to, if you're putting in a street, to have a sidewalk. It makes sense to potentially have a trail, but when that happens, any new development, it's automatically, if it's within this bylaw, means we kind of have to do it if it's feasible, to some degree. I guess my concern is, like, when I read this bylaw, it says that we'll get the developer to potentially, council has the right to require the developer to install or pay for growth-related infrastructure associated with new development. So if we have a developer coming in to develop a particular subdivision and that requires sidewalks, based on that, would the expectation it be that we expect the developer to pay for the sidewalk infrastructure? Is that something that would be the council of the day to decide if that's something they're going to make? Because I will say that in the past, St. Andrews has had a history of not being development friendly. And if this is a new standard, that is just a new amount that we'll have to add on. And ultimately, the price of homes are extremely high, as we just heard from that presentation. Ultimately, whether it be the taxpayer of St. Andrews or whether it be the purchaser of the subdivision, someone is going to have to pay for this. So ultimately, it's going to cost more money. So I guess my question is how we envision that looking like. And I'm not doubting that it isn't something we should have required. And then secondly, is if I look at like let me get my terminology right because it's still new. When I'm looking at like a local street class A, and I'll look at kind of where we have a high density area, so Champlain Avenue. If we're putting in a new road that's like kind of a local street at the bottom of that, it would have a sidewalk, but the main artery, Champlain Avenue, still wouldn't have a sidewalk. So it kind of feels like where all the traffic is doesn't have one, and then potentially down the hill will. And the reality is not everywhere can really have sidewalks in a community because, quite frankly, you can't afford it. Like, you really can't. We're having a hard time getting our vital ways with sidewalks. I just question if, as good as it sounds in theory, can a community really in a rural municipality afford to have sidewalk on, not all, and I know that some don't, but on as many roads as they do if they're not vital. And I guess that's a balance in this that I guess I'd be looking for maybe a little bit of comment from Mr. Henderson.
Sure thing. So the way this works is it's the standard, unless otherwise stipulated by council. So and that's how it works currently. So if council looks at this and says, you know what, this location you're not going to be able to do the sidewalks. You don't have sidewalks connecting for some ways, and we're not going to require. Now, council can do that. What we would do in some cases, though, is if there was an ability for the development that's connecting to, say, a street that had sidewalks, and they said, well, I would rather not put sidewalks in because of the cost. Well, if it's to meet the standard or not, what we would normally recommend is say, yes, you need to meet the standard. That cost should be involved. The sidewalk network shouldn't be cut off. But council has the ability to look at a situation and to accept a solution that is proposed. So if it doesn't meet the standard, you can still accept it. So that's actually in the text of the bylaw there before it even gets into different standards for the different types of development. So before states that unless otherwise stipulated by council or the minister, as the case may be. So certainly you could look at it case by case. Now, there's another longer conversation we could have about the idea of saying, well, if we don't want to stop developers from proposing subdivisions where they have to meet a bunch of different standards that are going to be costly, we want to make sure developers coming in, working in their community, and we want to be part of that. Well, if you want to contribute, of course, you can be part of your capital budget and so on. But that aside, even if it can't be part of the capital budgeting process, because not everything can get in the capital budget, there is another type of bylaw which the city of Moncton's using for what they term the vision lands. And so this is a bunch of private properties that are held privately. And the city in that case is trying to put in some of the major infrastructure like bridges and such to access this last sort of developable area of Moncton. So in their case, what they did is they instituted a development charge bylaw. So they're going to recoup the cost of the major infrastructure that has to connect to the development area. And then they're going to apply those costs on each lot. So if somebody purchases a lot and they go get a building permit, then they have to pay the development charge in addition to the building permit fee. Again, still passing the cost on to the person who's going to purchase a home and build a home. But in that case, it enables the development to happen in the first place because developers wouldn't touch it otherwise, just because the cost of the bridges would be too prohibitive. So you can use a couple tools like that if you're in a situation where you have a major capital cost to connect a new development area and there's no room in the capital budget and the developers can't pay for it either. If you want to spread it out over each lot, you can do it with the development charge bylaw.
Thank you. Do you have a question related to that, Mr. Spear?
Yes, Your Worship. I guess one thing, I understand what you're saying about the costs and stuff, but when developing land, you have to do it right the first time or it's never going to get done. As we've seen the challenges in the plat with active transportation, we're going to have to be building onto people's front lawns and different things like that. And even though people up front want to say that they want the cheapest way to get into a house, within a few years, they're saying, okay, what possible services are you going to be providing me and why not? And I think as you're looking at this, you're going to have to take that all into consideration, that these services become an important part of the community in the long run. And Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's even an opportunity. Let's say you don't want to create sidewalks at the front, but you could say, okay, but we're going to take an extra 5 meters of a right of way in order to potentially build an off-road trail in 5 or 10 years down the road, that could probably be incorporated on the long run if you wanted to encourage a developer to get in cheap to get the houses built. And then as the tax base builds up in an area and it becomes necessary to have these trails or walking areas, then as the taxes coming in to pay for it, you already have the easement there in the plans to have a sidewalk or a trail. You just have to start it once you feel the economic situation makes sense.
And I think that's the key point, that you don't want to assume that a street's going to just fill up and be high density and pay for all this infrastructure, and then it's privately owned and it doesn't happen, right? Like a little bit of a chicken and the egg, especially when I really can't see too many developers coming in here and agreeing to pay for a street full of sidewalk. I just can't. They're asking us for money, let alone we're going to charge you more. And then I guess the other one I'll pass over to council is just a little more clarity, just with Shamcook Bayside. I know like the definition for a local street means a right of way under the control of council, but when you're out in Shamcook Bayside and it comes to roads, this council doesn't control the roads at all. So I guess just a little bit of a highlight on that, if you could, Mr. Henderson, on the difference between the local street and how that is different. And I guess the other one is just to confirm, we do receive funds from time to time on Highway 127 as it enters town. It's technically a provincial highway, but I think it's under our authority to make decisions. So I'm just making sure that if you look at Mowat Drive or the 127, that is in fact part of this particular local street.
So yes, thank you, Your Worship. So to answer the question, the way this bylaw handles that distinction between Shamcook and Bayside and the town site of St. Andrews, it defines rural roads as roads under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. So those would continue to be managed by the department. So if you're proposing a new street in those areas, it would be handled by the DTI directly. And the only instance that the town would be involved, well, there's two. The PAC would be involved in recommending the layout to DTI, and council would be asked if the land for public purposes proposed in that subdivision are going to become an asset of the town. So you get to decide on that. But the street and the decisions around the street and the infrastructure is all DTI in rural areas. So that's and it's important that you have a bylaw that actually spells this out, because currently it's a bit vague as to the roles and responsibilities, and we want to be ready for the developers.
Thank you. I'll open up to council. I've asked my two questions. Member council, I think Councillor Bennett, did you have something on that?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Henderson, for enlightening us in this situation. I get the challenges with a developer that's coming in and going to develop a large parcel of property and going to put in potentially 100 lots or whatever. I get that. What about, are there provisions for the moms and dads out there that might be sitting on large properties, and their son or daughter comes along and decides that they'd like to have an acre broken off their property? They share a lane going up to the house, and they just want to subdivide an acre and let Junior build their house, their dreams, whatever, next door to mom and dad. Are there provisions in the rules for this without forcing, the 66-foot right-of-ways and the sidewalks and stuff just on the lanes that go into large parcels? Is there some kind of allowance for this kind of situation?
I may, Your Worship.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a great question from Councillor Bennett. Yes, and this bylaw would consider those situations. So specifically how it's addressed is it exempts property with frontage on existing public roads from having to go through this process of doing lands for public purpose and upgrading the road infrastructure if you're on an existing road that meets the standards. So if you have you're on actively maintained DTI road in Shamcook or Bayside, and you have an acre and the frontage and the zoning is correct, then yes, you can subdivide it without going through this process. You're just getting a surveyor, applying for a tentative plan. Our development officers review it, make sure it complies with the town's regulations, and then approve it as such. So it doesn't even go to PAC in that case. You're just creating a lot that meets all the requirements. It's very straightforward, actually. An existing right of way. What we would do is make sure, again, the right of way would meet your current standard. And in there, we have that very simple one. So the 90 meters or less, that's the kind of magic number for emergency vehicle access. And anything more than that, you're going to have to look at making sure it meets certain criteria. But for 90 meters or less, which could be about 3 lots, as kind of envisioned, this is very straightforward. It's just extending that right of way, or just having the lot created off that existing right of way where it's located, if you have the frontage in area 1 acre, for example. So also, I should just note that the provisions around sidewalks and such wouldn't apply in Shamcook or Bayside, because that's under the DTI's standards and jurisdiction.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Any other questions? Mr. Spear.
Alex, maybe just for clarity, does this apply to any development, or if someone is willing to have a private laneway or a private roadway that isn't going to be taken over by either municipality or DTI, do most of these rules really go out the window?
So with the private, oh, sorry, if I may, Your Worship.
By all means, you don't need my permission to answer questions.
All right. So yeah, with private roadways, it's the discretion of the PAC to approve them or not, and they can approve it or not for a variety of reasons. But if it doesn't meet the standard and it is a new private lane that has not existed before, then it would have to meet the standard, or PAC would likely reject it. So otherwise, they'd be asking for variance and an approval of the private right-of-way from the PAC. So we'd have to look, I mean, we could look at special cases where certain things would not be feasible. But private right-of-ways, I should also just note, given the new statement of provincial interest, what we have to kind of work towards is promoting development on public roads, because they're wanting to focus the development along publicly maintained roads wherever possible. Private roads are mostly used in cases where there's really not an opportunity to keep expanding the subdivision outward. Like, let's say you're on a peninsula, and against a geographical feature you're never going to be able to surmount, like a mountain or something like that. And the private lane may be appropriate in those cases, but mostly we're going to have to be working toward directing more developments to public roads, larger scale developments anyway. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does. It's just so there's more clarity among council. So I appreciate the statement of public interest and what their goals are. So it's important, because I think throughout New Brunswick, there's a ton of public laneways, and that there's been struggles with. And as people are developing them, it may be a change in thought, I guess, or moving forward, that people understand there's new rules, that even if they want to get away from the standards, it's not that as easy as it was maybe 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Just making sure, council. All right. So later on in this agenda, we will be looking to set a date for hearing of objections. That way we can hear from the public on things that they heard in this presentation, as well as give council some insight before we actually start going through the process of first reading on this. So thank you very much. A lot of work goes into something like that, and it is greatly appreciated by council. So thank you, Alex. Please pass that on to your team.
Thank you.
All right, so we are now, we have no minutes to approve, so we're into communications. We did actually from our award recipient tonight, Matthew Dickson, get a letter about starting proposals for mental health town halls, which would be a way to discuss mental health in our community. It could be a number of different individuals, from local citizens to school teachers to Indigenous members of our community to churches to local employers. The list goes on, but to get people in a room and start discussing ways to improve mental health in our communities. It talks about safe spaces, but also certain moderators that might be good. But one of the ideas is to have guest speakers. Matthew is here. I don't know if you wanted to come up and just speak for a couple moments on this. Since you are here, I think it'd be good for council to hear your idea, and then we'll kind of take it as next steps from this council, if that makes sense. Would you like to come up? Sure.
Thanks for accepting this proposal. A couple weeks ago or so, I had the idea of a mental health town hall, and we've been talking about mental health. It's new for us because of the pandemic. We can talk about mental health in public now. We've been talking in silos about public health. I've been to CMHA webinars and whatnot. Everyone's been having more closed doors conversations about mental health, and I'm over the moon about being able to talk about it in public now. And town halls are nothing new. We've been doing them for centuries. Like you said, just get everybody, all different agencies involved in the same room talking about this. I'm thinking more of a neighborhood focus. I made a YouTube video challenging other communities across Canada and other countries to do the same thing if they think it's a good idea. Disclaimer, I'm not a mental health expert or any kind of expert other than a civil engineer. I've got lived experience with mental health, and I think it's might work. If this did go through, if the town said this is something we'd like to do, I mean, the town is like a whole, like citizens and everybody, bipartisan, grassroots sort of thing. That's sort of my take on it. It's like something for St. Andrews, St. George, St. Stephen could do sort of their own things, and other communities the same way. That's sort of my overall idea around it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that. Since I asked you to stick around, I thought after 3 presentations that it would be nice to get you to come back up if I asked you to stay. Council, over to you. I think it's a tremendous idea whenever anyone wants to get together to talk about mental health. I think the reality is it's just something that doesn't happen in communities enough. So when you have someone, coming forward with an idea like that, it makes sense to fully explore it. I was wondering if there was a councillor that would like to kind of meet with Matthew and kind of get into details and talk a little specifically. I'm not putting anyone on the spot or looking at anyone, but is there a councillor that would like to raise their hand to get involved with this and maybe give us a little bit of a feedback what that could look like? I see a finger. That's Councillor Harlan would love to actually sit down. I think Mr. Knopp or Mr. Spear would love to sit down as well. Councillor Neal's raising their hand. So maybe when you get together, Councillor Hurl you're seeing a lot of councillors want to sit down and have this conversation with you to see what this looks like, to see what your involvement would be, to see how the town could support it and make it happen. So I'll leave it between Councillor Harlan and yourself. Councillor Harlan will reach out to us and let us know when that is. And she could take a leadership position on this file within her portfolio and her experience. So
that'd be great.
Yeah. So, but thank you for bringing it to our attention, and we definitely want to talk more for sure. Anything else from any member of council though on that? Okay, we appreciate that, and we will be in touch to schedule something.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Council, there is no staff report or financial report. That was last meeting. So we are in the introduction, consideration, and passing of bylaws. You'll notice that planning and economic development is at the front. We can do that, and it makes sense when we have someone like Mr. Henderson that's here versus go through an entire agenda and have it to be the last thing. You're gonna see this move around a little bit. I don't think it really takes anything away from the meetings, but sometimes guests that are here for a specific item, and it just, in essence of the fact that they probably have a meeting almost every night of the week, I think it's a courtesy that we could do for them. So over to you, Councillor Heenan.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. This is reference number PED 231010, bylaw number 23-05, subdivision bylaw. Town staff and the planners of the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission have been working on the creation of a new subdivision bylaw for the town of St. Andrews. Provided with this report is a copy of the proposed bylaw number 23-05, subdivision bylaw and planning report that provides details of proposed changes. The new subdivision bylaw gives flexibility for varying types of development that could be proposed in the community. Although this bylaw is governed under the Local Governance Act, it does relate to planning matters and is recommended to have a public hearing of objections and obtain the views of the Planning Advisory Committee prior to the first reading. There are two motions associated with this. So the first motion, that the Council of the Town of St. Andrews sets the date of Monday, November the 20th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. for the public hearing of objections to the proposed bylaw number 23-05, subdivision bylaw for the Town of St. Andrews. And your worship, I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Hina. Seconder for that one. I've got Councillor Bennett. Discussion. Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. The two things. One, I'd like to request to amend the date of this one, but in order to ask that, you kind of have to understand why. So a larger request would actually be to move the regular council session on November 20th to the Wednesday, November 22nd, and amend this motion to read 22nd as well. And the reason for that is on November 20th, we've all been invited to attend the Neighborhood Works night at 7 o'clock in St. Stephen. I think it would be really important for us to attend, and I wouldn't want that conflict to interrupt those two things. So procedurally, I guess there's an amendment in there and then another motion in there to move the regular council session over.
Thank you. That's a good point, because I've been invited to several things and I've always had a meeting every single night they do, to the point where I think that they think I might not care. And that's a good thing. What we'll do is could I look for just because we've got we have a time period we have to set. I was going to table it just so we can look at everyone's schedules just on that night. But if we table it, it will delay it. But does that hurt anything to just bring this back? Is there a time crunch on this particular one where we wouldn't just bring it back?
Right now, I think Councillor Hurdle has actually proposed an amendment. So I guess you should go through the first two steps and then table after.
Okay, perfect. So since we have a mover for the amendment, then we'll get a seconder to your point of order. Could I have a seconder for the amendment? I got Deputy Mayor Akaji. So just to be clear, that is just jumping ahead to the Wednesday, the 22nd. Okay. So I don't know if we want to set that right now or everyone look at their schedules quickly. I just don't want to lock us in unless there's something else going on that night that we're not aware of. If we could table it for just till the next regular meeting. But over to you. Maybe it works for
through your worship. It's your call. I mean, you don't necessarily have to run public hearings of objections on the same night you have regular council, so they can be separate. So you could make this motion to change it to the 22nd, and then you could have another motion tonight, or you can defer to the next regular council meeting to bring a motion forward to defer that regular council of the 20th.
Okay, it's on the floor, council. Whatever your pleasure is. There's nothing jumping up for me right away on this one, but I just want to make sure that I don't set something for you that there could be a competing PAC some other meeting. But if there's nothing, then we can go ahead. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I don't think we. Oh, Councillor Heenan.
Your worship, I was just looking through. I thought we had another motion to be set on the 20th as well in one of our other
we do. That's for the procedural bylaw. So we'd be moving that at the same, whatever we decide on this, okay. We'd be doing this. You don't have to, but I assume we do it for the same.
Yes. Thank you, worship.
Councillor.
Just one quick comment. I think we often talk about services that are set up in St. Andrews that benefit the entire region. And we often ask that other communities show their support for the services that we have set up here. I think this is a great opportunity for us to show support to another community that does services that impact and help us here too. So just as a note of encouragement, I think we should all show up.
Thank you. So there's no one that wants to table, and for the scheduling, I'm fine setting this. So we have a mover and a second on the amendment. All in favor of that amendment?
Aye.
That has been approved. So we'll go back to the original question. So this is to set the hearing objections on November 22nd. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That has been carried, and we're on to the next motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. Next motion, that the Council of the Town of St. Andrews requests the views of the Planning Advisory Committee for bylaw number 23-05, subdivision bylaw for the Town of St. Andrews. I so move that, Your Worship.
Thank you. A seconder for that one. Okay, we got Councillor Harland. Discussion? All in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye. That has been set. I think we're going to see Deputy Mayor Akaji, a very similar process for this one, but let's get it on the floor.
Oh, Your Worship.
Oops.
Sorry, can I just have a quick question before
Sure.
you jump off? This one was, due to the nature of the subdivision bylaw, I'm wondering if we should have maybe a special public engagement session. It doesn't have to be before the meeting of objection necessarily, but with potentially developers and builders in the area, just so people that should be in the know or in the know a little bit. We don't have to arrange anything tonight, but I just want council input if you want us to extend a little bit more than usual, or if you're okay to follow the normal process.
I think whenever you offer to do more engagement, we're going to say yes. So yes. Anyone feel contrary? Yeah, all for it. Thank you for that suggestion. Next one, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. FA 231017. And it's the bylaw number 23-06, a procedural bylaw for the organization and operation of the Council of St. Andrews. So the background is this. As a follow-up to September the 18th, 2023, regular council meeting discussion on bylaw 16-03, a procedural bylaw for the organization and operation of the Council of St. Andrews, provided a report outlining a new draft of the bylaw. Staff have taken the comments from the council and incorporated them into a new version of the bylaw. If council is satisfied with the changes presented by staff, it is recommended that a public hearing of objections be called to start the bylaw process. So the motion is this: that the Council of the Town of St. Andrews set the date of Monday, November the 20th at 6:45 p.m. for a public hearing of objections to bylaw number 23-06, a procedural bylaw for the organization and operation of the Council of St. Andrews in the council chambers at the W.C. O'Neill Arena, 24 Reed Avenue, St. Andrews. And I so move, Your Worship.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder for that one? Councillor Harland. And this one is open. I've got Councillor Hurdle, I'm assuming, looking to amend this to November 22nd. I'm a pretty good mind reader.
You read my mind.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
I have a seconder for Councillor Hurdle. I've got Deputy Mayor Akaji seconding that. So that's on the table. Any other discussion on this one, though? Okay, all in favor of setting the hearing of objections to November 22nd, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Good. Did I amend that successfully? Yes, I did. Good. Okay, Public Works. We are going to Councillor Blanchard, who is not here, so I will be looking.
Nope. Oh, sorry. You need to do one. Go back to your amendment.
Oh, sorry. I got to go back to the amendment. You're right. All in favor of that amendment. Well, we've approved the amendment. All in favor of the original motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that's everybody. That's been carried. So I'll be looking for one of our newer councillors. I wouldn't call you new anymore, but one of our newer councillors to agree to read the Public Works one. Councillor Harland is the first to raise her hand.
So this is page 56.
Yeah.
It's
Correct.
reference number PW 231013. And it's the subject is Canada Community Build Fund for heat pumps for Bayside Community Hall. The background of the motion is as follows. This report is a follow-up to the discussion from the October 3rd, 2023 regular council meeting on the use of the Canada Community Build Fund and plans to spend it in Bayside and Shamcook. Please see the attached report for additional details. It is the staff's recommendation that a portion of the funding be used in 2023 for the installation of heat pumps for the Bayside Community Hall for $17,000. $17,000, yes. The motion is as follows: that the Council of the Town of St. Andrews approves the installation of heat pumps for the Bayside Community Hall at a cost of $17,000 from the Canada Community Fund from 2023. And I so move.
And could I have a seconder for that one? I got Deputy Mayor Akergy very quick on that one. So we're up to open to discussion. You'll note that attached to the back of this is there is the report on the Dock Road. The Dock Road is not advertised on this particular council package. So to me, I think that report should come forward at a budget meeting when we're discussing, because it is something that we have within that when we get into capital projects. So, but from that last conversation you had, what I heard is the parking lot was going to be discussed further. But this one seemed like it was ready to come forward, if that's correct. So I guess open this up for debate. Deputy Mayor Akergy?
I think it's great that they're going to get heat pumps to bring down their heating costs. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Councillor Ware.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps Mr. Spear could comment on all the emails that floated around today with respect to the Sea Cadets and Bayside Hall.
Sure. So I guess it's outside the motion a little bit, but we'll say that there was the Sea Cadets have asked for additional space for their target shooting. And just to be clear, it's not with normal guns. It's, I think, with air rifles, just so I understand. Sometimes we allow them to do it in the summer and the off season. But they usually do it in the curling shed. But they're looking to be able to practice more frequently. And the Bayside Hall Committee was happy to allow for free use of space out there as well. And the kids usually, in anticipation of that, will also provide some types of volunteerism in the spring. So there may be something along to that. So we're grateful for that. And also it's grateful for more use of the Bayside Hall, which, because of the pandemic, face some struggles with use, but the recreation manager and the active committee, we're hoping to get more use. So anything we can do to make it a better situation will be great. And I think the Councillor Weir had mentioned before too, the committee had money left over before the local government reform, and they've taken almost all that money to upgrade the kitchen facilities on their own dime, so to speak. And so our previous tax dollars accumulated, so they'll be happy to even provide more use and an upgrade to the facility.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Mr. Spear. For someone that has done competitive handgun shooting, the heat pumps will be of great use. It's pretty stressful there on the firing line.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I just know if I had an area growing up that I could safely shoot a BB gun, I might have some of my childhood toys left over, because that's what we used to do. I'm guessing they're probably airsoft would be my assumption versus BB guns. So, but I haven't seen that happen yet.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye. Perfect. And this is probably one of those decisions that will pay for itself very shortly, based on, I guess you could say, more power efficient heating. All right, that's it for motions. Nothing under new business. Question period. Was anything submitted throughout the course online, Mr. Nopper, or is there anyone online? I guess you can ask if they do know online. Anyone in the audience like to ask any questions related to the agenda this evening? We've given you the mic already twice, Mr. Dickson. Okay, councillors' comments. I've got Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Worship. Just before we conclude business, in terms of moving the regular council session from the 20th, do we have to make a motion for that tonight?
I'll bring a motion forward to the next meeting.
Okay,
and then it'll just be formalized that way.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor Akergy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to mention that this week on the 20th of, which is Friday night, they're having a movie night at the Anglican Church Hall. And it's the Jesus Revolution, which is, I think I've got the right name. Anyway, it's a great movie. It's at 6:30 on Friday night at the Anglican Church Hall. It sounds like a great time. And then the 21st, which is Saturday night, right after it, they're having their Halloween party. So if you've got any youngsters or youth that are interested in being at the Halloween party, where they hunt for things outside if it's a nice weather day, but anyway, they do it. So, and that'll be at 6:30 on Saturday. So, and again, that's the Anglican Church Hall. And I'd like to thank the Legion for the banners will be going up for the Legion family members. So I'm excited. I want to see my dad up there. And I know the family is excited. And I know many of the families are excited. I'd like to thank their committee. I know Inez Thomas Cooley and Sue Coombs have headed it, and with our staff. Thanks to them for assisting them, and the town crew for putting them up. I know that's a lot of work, especially when you've had Indulge and you've been working very hard, but I really appreciate all the work that you do for our town and making it look spectacular. I've seen all the other ones up in St. Stephen and St. George, so I'm dying to see them in St. Andrews. So thank you very much, and thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other member of council? Okay, I'm good this evening myself, so let me just jump back here to my closed session.
Mayor Henderson, do you want me to read it?
I'm close, I think. All right, there we go. So at 7:47 p.m., I'll be looking for a mover to go into closed session as per the Local Governance Act, Section 68(1)(f), which is information concerning legal opinions or advice provided to the local government by its solicitor or privileged communication between solicitor and client in a matter of local government business. I've got business. I got Councillor Hurdle and seconded by Councillor Gumashell was quickest there. Councillor Neal, you've been third a lot tonight. I just wanted to let you know. All in favor of going to closed session, please signify by saying aye. That's everybody. We'll give a moment to shut it down. Thanks everyone for attending and listening this evening.